आपण आपण सुरू करायचं का? मॅडम पासून सुरू करायचं?
येस
मॅडम. हा, आणि मग ते तो टॉपिक झाल्यानंतर जे काही चर्चा असेल तर त्यावेळेला सगळे मिळून त्याच्यामध्ये कॉन्ट्रीब्युट करतील असं आपण करूया. मग आपण आता मॅडम पासून सुरू करू. मॅडम लॅब इन्व्हेस्टिगेशन्स आणि लो मॉलिक्युलर वेट हिपॅरिनचा यूज आणि इतर जे काही आपल्या गोष्टी आहेत त्याच्याबद्दल बोलतील. हा, बोला मॅडम प्लीज.
Good afternoon. I hope last time those people who were not there, and this PowerPoint presentation is mainly for those who have not attended. Because last time when I talked about the presentation, many requests came that Madam, we want a PowerPoint presentation, and that is the reason I have prepared. And in short, whatever is there, which is everybody is aware and everybody is sharing the same experience, but just to make overview of clinical features, I am presenting this presentation. The first slide. Now, this was long back on 30th of January when we had a seminar on COVID, or that time so-called corona infection. We had prepared and
Madam,
we had a presentation.
Sangani madam, sorry to disturb you. Your voice is not that clear.
Okay. It is okay. आता आवाज ऐकू येतोय?
Much better.
Okay. Because I was sitting quite behind. Now, the common symptoms, I think the triad of symptoms which everybody is aware, which is described even now also, is fever, dry cough, shortness of breath. So these are the three common symptoms: fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath. But apart from these three common symptoms, patient can present with various other manifestations, and they include fatigability, decreased WC count in the form of basically leukopenia, but then leading to other infections, renal dysfunction, and hepatic dysfunction. Next slide. The common symptoms which we come across when patients are coming to casualty and getting admitted: very high fever, followed by dry cough and shortness of breath. But apart from these symptoms, the fatigue, extreme fatigability, and severe myalgia is another very important symptom. So all these are four common symptoms. Associated other symptoms which include are headache. Now, our residents who were infected with COVID, they, out of 6, 3 residents presented with headache without fever. So headache was the commonest symptom, without fever, without cough. So I think headache is very important symptom, though it is described as uncommon. But headache as a manifestation, especially young healthy individuals, I think headache we should not ignore, because this may be, as you are aware, it is a prothrombotic stage. So patient can develop CVST if you do not recognize it at the proper time. Sore throat, dry cough and sore throat, throat pain is another important manifestation. We are coming across 2 to 5% of patients coming with diarrhea. So fever and diarrhea, though amoebiasis and other infestations are common, but in the scenario of COVID, I think diarrhea with fever, we should keep a possibility of COVID infection. Rhinorrhea is not so commonly described as it was in H1N1, but rhinorrhea, being a viral infection, upper respiratory tract, when it is affected, even rhinorrhea can be seen. Next. Now, though I told that fever is common and high fever is common, elderly patients and those who are diabetics, those who are immunocompromised, they may not develop fever, and that is a very important warning that patient does not have fever, does not exclude the viral infection. So diabetics, elderly and immunocompromised patient may not come with fever. They may come only with shortness of breath or only dry cough. And in patients who are diabetic on ACE inhibitors or febrile, dry cough, we may consider that it can be because of ACE inhibitors. But I think those patients, unless we check for SpO2, we check for X-ray test, then only we will be able to diagnose pneumonia. Otherwise, these cases may come late. So that early referral is very, very important. The another important manifestation is loose motions and abdominal pain. And this loose motions along with abdominal pain, we have to consider thrombosis of the mesenteric vasculature, and early intervention with low molecular weight heparin may be helpful. extreme fatigability. A patient who has viral pneumonia, a viral infection, always develops myalgia. Along with myalgia, they have fatigue. But extreme fatigue is indirect marker of cardiac involvement. So early cardiac involvement leading to dilated heart and developing breathlessness and heart failure. So fatigability is important symptom. Another important symptom which we are seeing is loss of smell, anosmia, and or loss of taste, and which is very classical in early stage or in asymptomatic healthy carriers. So young individuals who are asymptomatic, as 80% of the individuals are asymptomatic. So similarly, young healthy individuals, their first symptom may be anosmia or loss of taste. I think last time those who have attended, one of our residents who was working in casualty, and she realized that it was told to her that patient of OP has come, but she did not smell the OP, and because of that anosmia of loss of smell to OP, she went for swab and it turned out to be positive. So I think anosmia is an early symptom, and it is commonly seen in asymptomatic healthy individuals, and these are the spreaders. So if anosmia is detected, I think they should be isolated. If possible, the swab should be done. If it is not possible for others because they are asymptomatic, at least they should be isolated. So that is very important symptom which we have to take into consideration. Another important symptom by which patients are coming to hospital are they are brought pulseless or they are brought in altered sensorium. So altered sensorium in old age, especially diabetics, they usually have very high blood sugar and their urine ketones are nil. So non-ketotic hyperglycemia coma is important manifestation associated with COVID. Secondly, patient can have hepatic involvement due to direct COVID related. So hepatic abnormality, involvement leading to altered, so hepatic encephalopathy. Hyponatremia in old age is very common. So electrolyte imbalance leading to hyponatremia. Severe hypoxic brain damage due to persistent hypoxemia, and possibility of direct brain involvement due to COVID infection also can leading to viral encephalitis may be a possibility of altered sensorium. So we have to consider all this. Now, apart from these symptoms related to disease, patients usually have comorbidity, and therefore along with comorbidity they may present with associated symptoms, like patient who is a known case of CKD may present with either oliguria. However, patient who develops COVID infection associated renal involvement, the renal involvement is usually is non-oliguric. So oliguria may not be a presenting symptom if it is, oliguria may not be there if it is directly related to COVID infection, but if patient has CKD, patient will present with oliguria or fluid overload. Another important aspect for this is now, since the pandemic of COVID infection, majority of the dialysis centers are closed, and therefore the patients who are coming to any government hospital, their last dialysis was done 10 days back or 15 days back or 7 days back, and therefore they usually are brought with fluid overload, and that is a very important manifestation. And they many times they may or may not have low respiratory infection, but because they are in fluid overload, they are breathless and they are considered as a suspect case. Patient with rheumatic heart disease or ischemic heart disease, either due to arrhythmia, they present with palpitations, and ischemic heart disease may present with chest pain due to prothrombotic state leading to acute myocardial infarction. So chest pain, palpitation. Patient who is a known case of chronic liver disease may develop along with COVID infection. The jaundice may get worsened, and so decompensation of liver disease will manifest with jaundice. Patients who are obese and who have obstructive sleep apnea, they will present with worsening of dyspnea, especially at night, and because of arrhythmias, they will have palpitations. Patients, again, another risk factor is patients who already have pulmonary tuberculosis. So pulmonary tuberculosis and COVID infection, they may present with hemoptysis, and the hemoptysis is classical. They usually is not a large hemoptysis, but it is a blood stench at the periphery. Next. Symptoms. Now, since everybody is aware now, Italy autopsy findings have showed that it rather than viral pneumonia, it is a thrombosis which is responsible. And so various manifestations related to thrombosis, either in the form of hemiplegia due to cerebrovascular accident, DVT or gangrene due to either venous or arterial thrombosis, so peripheral vascular disease, myocardial infarction due to cardiovascular artery thrombosis, and abdominal pain due to mesenteric artery thrombosis. So symptoms are related to thrombotic, and these are related to various systems. Now hemiplegia can be because of arterial thrombosis or can be because of cerebral venous sinus thrombosis, CVST. Next. Okay, now previous. Now we have so far many patients are coming. Mortality is very high. I think every hospital and every district is facing the same problem. Initially it was in Pune, now it is in Solapur. Everywhere the number of admissions and number of severe cases are increasing. And why they develop complications? First is because they come late, and secondly, by the time they have bilateral pneumonia, more than 5 zones lung involvement, I don't think any treatment, whatever we try, the success rate is very poor. But if they come early, if they are diagnosed early, treated early, I hope that at least we should have some positive outcome. Since it is a dry viral pneumonia, the ARDS is in indoor hospital patients, the ARDS is important complication. Acute kidney injury and acute cardiac injury. So myocarditis and renal involvement, these are the two common complications which we are observing, along with liver hepatic involvement. But hepatic involvement is mainly in the form of only raised SGOT, SGPT. Bilirubin is not very high, but they have transaminitis along with cardiac injury in the form of myocarditis. So tachyarrhythmias associated with raised CPKMB, and if echo is done, it shows wall motion abnormalities. Secondary bacterial infection is not so common, but terminally many patients, those who die, may have DIC-like picture. Now, who are at risk? So what is the risk factor? Extremes of age, diabetes mellitus, immunocompromised patients, or patients who are on immunosuppressive drugs, and cardiovascular disease in the form of either ischemic heart disease, rheumatic heart disease, COPD patients, pulmonary COX patients who are already having pulmonary tuberculosis, patients who have underlying long-standing lung disease, hypothyroidism, and obesity. These are the common which we come across. The HIV positive patients, very few cases are so far from the records. The HIV positive cases are very few. Even that was seen even in H1N1 infection also. Now everybody is aware of this. Onset of symptoms usually 2 to 9 days post exposure, average 5 days, and the 1 week prodrome is in the form of myalgia, malaise, low grade fever, and dry cough, which initially may be very mild, but if this stage is not recognized and not treated at early stage, second week where patient will develop sudden high fever and dyspnea, sensation of dry throat, feeling of dry throat, and pneumonia by day 9 or 10. And once there is pneumonia or low respiratory tract infection, then the prognosis is poor. So we have to catch them in the first week and treat them early. Next. Now, as everybody is aware, more than 80% of the patients who are having COVID infection are mild and they are asymptomatic. And those asymptomatic may have only anosmia. So that is one important point which I will add. So mild or asymptomatic and maybe anosmia. 14% are severe and 5% become critical, and they are mainly in the ICU. They usually, if they are treated with antibacterial and antiviral, even then some patients have associated co-infection in the form of influenza, mycoplasma, respiratory syncytial virus, etc. So we have seen mycoplasma as a co-infection in Sassoon Hospital, So those patients who turned out to be mycoplasma, we are giving them additional azithromycin is there, but then doxycycline or other antibiotics. Next. The investigation now, my today presentation is mainly highlighting on investigations, which investigations should be done, and next is about coagulopathy. So now I have not added nasopharyngeal swab because that is important and must. So unless you do nasopharyngeal swab and for RT-PCR, we cannot go ahead with other investigations. So first is when you suspect, the nasopharyngeal swab is important, but when swab is sent and patient is admitted, all which investigation should be done and at what interval is very important. So all basic investigations are to be done on the day of admission when patient is admitted. If these investigations are normal, you repeat it on day 3. If they are abnormal, then we do, and if we repeat on day 3, if normal and patient is not becoming worsening, but if patient is worsening, then even you will have to repeat on day 2 also. So if normal and patient is not worsening, you can repeat on day 3. If they are normal on day 1, repeat daily or alternate day depending on clinical scenario. So it is not hard and fast rule you have to do only on alternate day. If patient is worsening, you will have to do even daily. Now investigations which should be done, and these investigations should be done for monitoring of patient, even in patients who are COVID suspect. So nowadays we have suspected wards also. So those patients who are very classical of COVID and suspected as COVID infection, till the report is awaited, they are kept in isolation. So even for those patients who have classical picture, clinical and radiological, only the swab is awaited. So those cases also should undergo these investigations and should be treated as early as possible. ECG is monitoring, daily ECG is important, must, for monitoring for QT interval, especially those who are on hydroxychloroquine prophylaxis and or not prophylaxis, hydroxychloroquine or hydroxychloroquine plus azithromycin, or patient who has who is likely to develop myocarditis. Now, if ECG shows worsening or if there is QT prolongation or ECG suggestive of myocarditis, we have to stop hydroxychloroquine as well as azithromycin. So ECG is must, not only for proving myocarditis, but also if there is evidence to suggest myocarditis, we have to stop SCQ as well as azithromycin. So that is very, very important. When patient is hospitalized, ECG monitoring for QT prolongation and for withholding hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin combination. Next. Now, which investigations? I think every hospital has a facility, and those hospitals who do not have facility for the investigations, special investigations, they have to get it done from by outsourcing those investigations. And this has been told by Dr. Archana Patil Madam repeatedly. So investigations which are very, very important is baseline investigation in the form of hemogram, and hemogram mainly for anemia or hemoglobin, WBC count, total count, and differential, and not only differential but neutrophil lymphocyte ratio. Usually these patients have total leukopenia, usually less than 5,000 WBC count, and neutrophil lymphocyte ratio is more than 3.5, especially in patients above 55 years of age. So neutrophil lymphocyte ratio, platelet count is usually normal, but some patients do have mild thrombocytopenia. And importance of platelet count is mainly in the management when patients have thrombotic element. When the majority of patients, I think everybody has experienced that diabetes is a very important risk factor, and therefore any patient who is suspected COVID, random blood sugar on the immediately after admission, I think random blood sugar is very important. If patient is found diabetic, then naturally urine sugar, ketones, and daily monitoring for BSL monitoring, everything will be required. So hemogram and random BSL urine exam, these are basic, with renal function test including blood urea, creatinine, liver function test, pulse oximetry for saturation, and arterial blood gas. Serum electrolyte, if you are suspecting hyponatremia, and especially when patient has CKD, known CKD, then whether there is hyperkalemia. And so for that purpose, potassium is also equally important. Amylase mainly for pancreatitis. Blood sugar profile will be required, and monitoring of blood sugar by chart and glycosylated hemoglobin for diabetic patients. X-ray chest, baseline on day of admission is very, very important to find out how many zones of lung are affected. So it will indicate the prognosis. And usually there is subpleural ground glass opacity. So involvement is at periphery, and peribronchial involvement is also common. If possible, CT of the chest, but then this is a closed circuit, and therefore if another patient has to be taken, it is not too easy for hospital unless there is a dedicated CT machine and dedicated room. ECG daily, and 2-day echo when you suspect myocarditis. And it is not only for myocarditis, but those patients who are having ischemic heart disease or hypertension, whether what is their LV dysfunction, whether there is LV dysfunction, or whether they have cor pulmonale, for all those factors, 2-day echo is must. I will not go into the details of cytokine storm markers, that is ESR, CRP, LDH, ferritin. Kakrani sir is going to talk in detail about it. Now, D-dimer, prothrombin time are mainly for thrombosis management, TROP-T and CPKMB for myocarditis, and procalcitonin, blood sugar, urine culture and blood culture, they will be mainly indicated when patient is now, suppose patient is catheterized and he has developed fever, he is not responding. So urine culture will be required after 7 days if patient, so, and change of antibiotics. Same is true for blood culture and for procalcitonin when you are suspecting septic shock. Next. Now BNP or pro-BNP is indicated if in a suspected as well as confirmed cases of myocarditis. HIV by ELISA is must, and it is not as to rule out risk factor, but when many patients are coming with CKD and we want to take them for dialysis. So before dialysis, HIV, HBsAg and SCV, all three are important. So these are considered as baseline investigations when patient is getting admitted in COVID hospital. Blood group, not only for if patient has anemia, we have to give blood transfusion, but blood group is again important on the day of admission, because if suppose these patients are eligible for plasma therapy, on the day of admission, if you have blood group, then if patient is eligible for plasma transfusion, this will be useful investigation, and because the cross-matched plasma can be given if patient fulfills the criteria for recipient for plasma donation. Hypothyroidism, if patient is suspected or known case of hypothyroidism, we have to do test, so mainly TSH. If TSH is very high, we can increase the dose and monitor accordingly. If you are suspecting hepatic encephalopathy, then so jaundice is there, patient is known case of liver disease, chronic liver disease, altered sensorium, flapping tremors clinically. I think serum ammonia will support your diagnosis and treatment for hepatic encephalopathy. So serum ammonia. Ultrasound has to be done if patient has CKD, and it is not only for kidney size, treatable cause of acute kidney injury, if it is there like obstructive, if there is stone, bilateral renal stones, so obstructive uropathy. Now pelvis, if patient is a female patient, any pathology in the ovaries or uterus can be sorted out, and Doppler for DVT in the lower limb, which is extending into the femoral or iliac region, arterial as well as venous Doppler whenever indicated. So Doppler is not for all, but it may be required if you suspect that patient has developed thrombosis, then arterial or venous thrombosis can be confirmed by Doppler study. Markers of cytokine storm, sir will discuss in detail.
You may mention Dr. Sangle, you may mention markers of cytokine storm. I may focus on pathophysiology and clinical features.
Sir, I have already shown once.
Okay.
The CRP, previous slide. Previous slide. So, LDH, ferritin, interleukin 6, ESR and CRP. Basically, these are markers of inflammation which will produce cytokines. So, interleukin 6, ferritin, LDH are very important along with ESR and CRP. Next. Now, my talk apart from this clinical feature is mainly on COVID-associated coagulopathy, that is CAC. Now, when patient of COVID infection presents, and especially those who have bilateral pneumonia, who have multi-organ dysfunction. So multi-organ dysfunction is multifactorial, and amongst the factor which is responsible is hypercoagulable state, which is due to micro as well as macro circulatory thrombosis. So it is small blood vessels developing, so micro circulation with thrombosis as well as large blood vessel thrombosis, both are responsible for hypercoagulable state. And over 70% of patients who are dying, they usually have criteria of DIC. And how to suspect? So on baseline, on the day of admission, a patient's D dimer is marginally raised, so that is an early marker, or prothrombin time marginally prolonged. So don't ignore marginally raised prothrombin time or marginally raised D dimer. We have to repeat if patient, even if patient is stable, and suspected patient or proven patient, before this lab report is coming, I think we have to give a prophylactic dose of low molecular weight heparin. Apart from these two factors, the fibrinogen level is equally important, and low fibrinogen, increased D dimer and prolonged prothrombin time, these are the markers which are commonly associated coagulopathy. Elevated D dimer is a strong and independent risk factor for death, and therefore it is very important, and it has to be monitored regularly for the purpose of prognostic value, having prognostic value. Next. Now, patients who have pulmonary involvement with pulmonary microthrombi, there is hypoxia which is disproportionate or out of proportion to the pulmonary compliance, and the reason being the abnormality or due to pulmonary vasculopathy. So pulmonary arterial or vasculature getting thrombosed is the manifestation which is proven on autopsy. And therefore, prophylactic dose of low molecular weight heparin is recommended for all hospitalized patients with COVID-19 and all stages from group C onward. So stage 1, group C onward, that is symptomatic patients, URTI with comorbidity, pneumonia, that is lower respiratory without respiratory failure, with respiratory failure, and with multi-organ dysfunction. So all will be required low molecular weight prophylactic dose till the report is awaited, and if they are high, the D dimer is high, then naturally we'll give the twice daily dose. Next. The first dose should be offered even in suspect patient, and it is when it is proven that patient will be given twice daily 40 milligram if D dimer is raised, and this has to be continued by monitoring the patient. Now, low molecular weight heparin is given even if coagulation tests are abnormal. So even if prothrombin time is prolonged or APTT is prolonged, it is not a contraindication. We have to continue giving low molecular heparin. Next, but when it should be avoided. So we cannot continue giving. So when it should be stopped, when there is active evidence of active bleeding, then it should be avoided. Or secondly, when platelet count, patient has platelet count of 1 lakh, you can continue. But if patient has platelet count less than 25,000, patient has active bleeding, fibrinogen level is less than 0.5 gram per liter, then low molecular weight heparin should be avoided or it should be stopped. Next. Now the dose is 40 milligram subcutaneously OD as a prophylactic dose. Therapeutic dose is 40 milligram subcutaneously twice daily. Now, if low molecular weight heparin is not available, or if there is a contraindication of low molecular weight heparin in the form of deranged RFT. If RFTs are severely deranged or low molecular weight heparin is not available, then we can give heparin, conventional heparin 10,000 units stat followed by 5,000 units 6 hourly with monitoring of clotting time. So before giving next dose of heparin, the clotting time is must. If either this is which we commonly follow, but you can give heparin 10,000 bolus IV stat followed by 1,000 units in hourly infusion if you have an infusion pump available. So unless it is available, then otherwise we should not give, because suddenly staff nurse will, if it is an infusion drip, she may start the drip faster and it will, so unless there is an infusion pump, then only this 1 hourly dose should be given. Otherwise 5,000 units IV 6 hourly if low molecular weight heparin is not available. Next slide. Now suppose patient has active bleeding and patient has, so if platelet, we will have to treat. So platelet, transfusion of platelets, if the platelet count is less than 40,000. So 40,000 or below platelet count in a patient who is COVID positive, we will have to transfuse with platelet. 4 units of fresh frozen plasma is also required if prothrombin or PTINR is prolonged. So 2 or more. Now another importance is cryoprecipitate 10 units if fibrinogen is less than 1.5 grams per liter. Now the last point, that is severe coagulopathy and bleeding due to liver dysfunction, 4-factor prothrombin complex, that is 4-factor PCC is preferred instead of plasma. But then I'm not sure whether it is available everywhere. So even we do not have, but this is the described treatment. Next. Thank you. असं म्हटलं सगळ्यांनी प्रश्न लिहून शेवटी करूया, कारण मग जाईल. कारण वेळ नाही तर जाईल ह्याच्यामध्येच.
I will start my presentation. My presentation is with Prashant, so I'll request him to start with the presentation. I'll be focusing basically on cytokine storm because that was one of the requests from one of the centers. So my focus is entirely on cytokine storm. Next slide, please. So cytokine storm is basically a clinical condition characterized by significant pro-inflammatory cytokine release leading to dysregulated hyperactive immune responses causing the organ dysfunction. So normally this does not happen in COVID, but it happens in certain cases. And when this happens, there is a disaster in form of what is called a cytokine storm or cytokine release syndrome. Actually, technically, it should better be called a cytokine release syndrome, but we commonly call it as a cytokine storm. With pathogenic coronaviruses, there is a rapid viral replication along with massive inflammatory cell infiltration in elevated flow inflammatory cytokine and chemokine responses. And there is an increasing evidence to suggest that a subgroup of patients with severe COVID-19 may develop cytokine release syndrome, acute lung injury, and ARDS. I think we are familiar with something of this sort happening in many other viral illnesses, particularly dengue, particularly people in Pune, Mumbai, Nagpur, Aurangabad, big cities have seen what is I think somebody says that my audio is not clear. Can others hear it? Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
So there is a subgroup of patients. There is a subgroup of patients who develop the cytokine storm or cytokine release syndrome. And we go to the next slide. Next one. See, you have to remember in COVID-19 disease, there is a bimodal. Firstly, what is cytokine storm? These are the chemicals which are released, which is in form of interleukin 2, interleukin 6, IL-7, GCSF, interferon gamma, then MCP1, MCP1 alpha, and TNF alpha. These are the cytokines which are released. Most of the situation, these are the cytokines which are normally released. Maybe there are some more chemicals which are released in this disease. Hence, this is slightly different than what we see in dengue. In dengue, we have seen, particularly in Pune, Mumbai, and big cities, there are a lot of cases of what is called as HLH syndrome or secondary HLH syndrome, where there is hemophagocytic lymphohistiocytosis. And it is almost similar to that, but not exactly same. Hence, we use a slightly different term called a cytokine release syndrome. The secondary HLH is usually triggered by viral infections, and we have seen dengue being the most common. It is characterized by unremitting fever, pulmonary involvement, cytopenias, and increased ferritin. Almost everything of this sort happens here in COVID, but HLH has defined criteria. There are two different criteria for HLH. I will not go into those details, but it is very close to what we see the HLH in dengue, severe dengue cases. Next. Prashant, please go to next slide. Why this happens in certain people and why did slide earlier to that. Why this happens in certain people and why it doesn't happen in others. No, you are going ahead. Go back. Next. So why it happens in certain people and not in others? There are various reasons explained that there are individuals behave differently. There are comorbidities. There may be genetic predispositions, and certain individuals may have a modified response because of these. These findings indicate that the inflammatory response is an important throughout the course of infection. Next. See, this is something that Dr. Sangha has already emphasized. In addition to inflammatory responses, there are derangements in coagulation parameters, raised D-dimer, higher level of FDPs, and prolonged prothrombin time, which all aid to morbidities and mortality. And as Dr. Sangre very clearly emphasized, as compared to survivors, DIC was reported significantly higher in the proportion of people who are non-survivors or who died. And this is part of the storms. Next.
If we all mute our audios and videos, the bandwidth will be better available and his audio will be better heard.
I changed my Wi-Fi, so I hope now it will not cause any problems. There are two Wi-Fis in my house. So as compared to survivors, people with DIC report significantly higher proportion of problems in terms of DIC, which Dr. Sangha elaborated in great details. Next. Yes, this is what she had emphasized, that people who have higher D-dimers have clearly predictable high mortality as compared to people who are normal or marginally high D-dimer. So any value which is more than 2 could be effectively predict in-hospital mortality and with a sensitivity of 92.3 to and specificity of 83.39%. So it is clearly showing that more the D-dimer, more the mortality in patients with cytokine storm. Next. As Dr. Sangre broadly mentioned, that patients with COVID-19 should be screened for hyperinflammation using laboratory trends like serum ferritin, D-dimer, and decreasing platelets, and if possible, IL-6. I am not insisting on this, but I can tell you that in Pune, almost half the hospital dealing with these cases are doing IL-6 now, which is helping us a lot. There is something called as HS score, which includes 9 parameters and which will suggest you which are the patients which will go into cytokine release syndrome. This I will try to demonstrate at the end. I requested Prashant to put this into the browser and show this. For calculating HS score, this is the site. Abolishing or minimizing the cytokine storm can helpfully reduce the death and outcomes in severe cases. So it is very important that we recognize this in time. We do serum ferritin in time. We do platelet counts in time. We see NL ratio in time. And if possible, do IL-6 in time and start managing so that we control disease in time. Next. So what are the therapies? Do we have effective forms of therapy? The current available therapies, I'll just mention corticosteroids, vitamin C, heparin. Heparin, though we use for coagulation abnormalities, but how heparin helps in this area, I'll mention in some more details later. Then serine protease inhibitors like ulinistatin, then convalescent plasma, then blood purification systems, IL-6 inhibitors like tocilizumab, which is now used at many centers, and JAK inhibitors like baricitinib, and certain other drugs like IL-6 inhibitors like sarilumab, EZLS501, an experimental drug, and NK1 antagonist like tradipitant. So I'll be trying to elaborate some of these drugs. Next. See, low dose steroids have been recommended by us in our guidelines, and it should be used. It is used worldwide. There are a lot of systemic reviews which say that the advantage of steroid is not very strong. WHO unfortunately says that this does not offer any advantage. In the past, but there is experience in the past where there was MERS coronavirus disease and SARS-1 coronavirus disease. There was significantly increased risk of mortality in these conditions. So particularly intensivists have a very severe fear of using steroids. But here in SARS-2, particularly studies from China suggested that there are certain advantages of using the storm. When should you use it and how, at what stage should you use? I'll try to explain later. Steroid should be used for 3 to 6 days, only in critically ill patients based upon the clinical judgment with adequate monitoring of respiratory function and pneumonia's worsening on EXIP. This is what Indian Society of Critical Care Medicine has recommended in its expert guidelines very recently. Next. Next. Yeah. So WHO says no, but we say yes, and we will continue to use it, though for a shorter period. Now heparin, Dr. Sangre has elaborated. Heparin is not only an anticoagulant, but I'll go to then vitamin C. Heparin, I'll go. Yes. Heparin has an advantage that it has some anti-inflammatory properties. So inflammation and thrombin generation directly related to the disease, where heparin can block the inflammatory responses by inhibiting thrombin formation. So heparin also has an anti-inflammatory role. So heparin is a very useful drug in COVID-19. Direct anti-inflammatory properties of heparin are due to its ability to stop the cytokine storm, inhibition of neutrophil chemotaxis and thrombosis and hemostasis, has recommended that thromboprophylaxis with LMW should be done in all cases of COVID-19.
आवाज येत नाही सर.
आता है तो? Can you hear now?
Yes sir, yes sir.
Okay. So as I mentioned, heparin is not only for prevention of thrombosis, but also as an anti-inflammatory drug that we should always use heparin in all hospitalized cases. Next. Next. No, before that, vitamin C. Go back to vitamin C. Before that, yeah. See, vitamin C has its action as in the oxidative stress and inflammation reduction function and for regulation of immune system in the cells. And epigenetic immunological modifications show its efficacy in sepsis and ARDS. So its role in ARDS has been strongly suggested. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes sir. Hello. Hello. येतोय सर आवाज?
There was a trial in sepsis.
Yes, sir, we can hear.
Sepsis called as CITRIS ALI trial, which was a randomized double-blind control trial at multi-centers, where in sepsis they found IV vitamin C offered a great advantage, which was in form of mortality of 29% versus 46.3% people who did not use vitamin C. So if it works in sepsis as an anti-inflammatory agent, it should work in COVID. That is the basis of using it. Many centers have started using it. Shanghai Medical Association recommends its use in form of 100 to 200 milligrams per kilogram IV daily till oxygen improvement occurs. We have not still recommended in our guidelines. Yes, we may review it, but people are using in India largely in form of 50 milligram per kilogram of dose in 5% dextrose to be given over a period of about 3 to 4 days. Giving very fast, it can cause problems. So you have to give it slowly. Next. Next. Heparin has been done. So after heparin. Now this is serine protease inhibitors. There are recent observations which suggested that the COVID receptors block ACE2 for its entry into the host cells, and host cell protease PMPR SS2 is necessary for SARS2 spike proteins to work, priming its effective attachment to S2 receptors. And Zhao et al. In China demonstrated that viral spread and pathogenesis of SARS2 COVID was effectively prevented by using serine protease inhibitor. And they used the drug which was called as chemostrate. Then another drug that was used there in China was nefemostat. It is another serine protein inhibitor which showed some promise in MERS in China and also in the Gulf countries. So in India, we have only one drug which is commonly available, and intensivists are very fond of using that, and that is ulinistatin. It is a broad spectrum serine protease inhibitor which they use in sepsis, which they use in acute pancreatitis. I also have a lot of experience of using it. I was never very happy with the results of this drug. I have no experience of using this drug in COVID. I don't really treat these cases. Next. Next.
ऑडिबल नहीं है सर, नॉट ऑडिबल.
Not audible.
हाँ करा. सर तुम्ही व्हिडिओ बंद केला तरी चालेल, ऑडिओ म्हणजे ठेवला फक्त तरी चालेल.
ओके ओके ओके. माझा व्हिडिओ बंद करतो.
Sir, you can continue the video. Rest of the people can stop the videos because there is a shared bandwidth. Please switch off your videos.
Okay.
Only Kakarni sir will keep his video on, and all others will switch off their videos. So bandwidth sharing will be less.
Okay, just a minute. I'll try to. Yeah. Slide before that. Another treatment option. Go slide before that. Another treatment option is just before that, before Placid trial. A slide before. This plasma is reducing the cytokine storm. The convalescent plasma is an antibody-rich plasma collected from recovered patients, which are transfused to the 6 patients. There was a very short trial in China, which was done on 5 critically ill patients by giving transfusion with plasma rich with SARS-2 specific antibodies binding with a binding capacity of 1 in 1000 and neutralizing titer of greater than 40 to reduce the viral load. It was found that laboratory, the US has also started this trial. Has started a trial, and they are very clear in their inclusion criteria. If patient has dyspnea with SpO2 less than 93, respiratory rate more than 30 per minute, PaO2 to FiO2 ratio less than 300, and lung infiltrates of more than 50% within 24 to 48 hours, or life-threatening respiratory failure, shock, and MODS. So these are the patients who in US are included in the trial of convalescent plasma in US after taking consent from patient or its healthcare proxy. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is how it works. I think I'll not go into details. The COVID patient's serum is collected who is recovering. It is drawn, it is injected to a person who is suffering from disease, and because it contains viral neutralizing antibodies, it's expected to work. People have not only tried in severe disease, people have even tried in sometimes even in prophylaxis. Next. We also are trying convalescent plasma, and these are the centers in Maharashtra that are included in the list. This may have got updated, but last that I have drawn from ICMRs are BJ Medical College at number 1, then HN Reliance Hospital, then Kolhapur, then Nair Hospital, Government Medical College, Nagpur, Aditya Birla Memorial, Pune, and Pune Hospital, Pune. And this trial is called as Placid trial. Most of the trials are given a fancy name. So this is called as Placid trial. And the trial target is to include 452 patients to see the response in severe cases, which also include patients with cytokine storm. Next. Now there is something called as blood purification systems. And this is what is not normally not tried in India by anybody. Maybe I'm not aware then. Cytokine clearance can also be achieved by using artificial liver blood purification system called as ALBP system. Methods such as plasma exchange, plasma absorption, and or hemoplasma filtration can be employed for cytokine clearance. This has been tried in many other situations. We all know that we do plasmapheresis, but COVID, I am not aware whether anybody has tried in India. In China, an expert consensus recommended that ALBM therapy should be done in severe COVID-19 patients who exhibit cytokine storm. Indications for its use were 5-fold or higher levels of pro-inflammatory cytokines such as IL-6 or an increase of more than 1-fold per day. So supposing if it is 1,000, next day it should become 2,000 and then third day becoming 3,000. Rapid decrease or progression with more than 10% of lung involvement every day getting added to it. Or comorbidities requiring ALBP in any case. Next. Now, IL-6 inhibitors, the drug that we have started using it, every center in Pune is trying to use this drug, and now it is available in districts also. In fact, one of our students who is admitted somewhere in one of the districts in Maharashtra, it was made available to him by shifting from another district. So it is now available in the district hospital, and I'm so happy about it. There was an open label non-controlled study from China on 21 severe patients, which showed that even a single dose of 400 milligram IV infusion reported improved oxygenation and normal lymphocyte counts. After a mean of 15.5 days of treatment, 19 patients were discharged, suggesting that potential effectiveness of tocilizumab in severe cases of COVID-19. Tocilizumab in COVID-19 pneumonia is in phase 2 trial in US, where they use 8 milligram per kilogram, maximum dose of 800 milligrams per dose at an interval of 12 hours in severe hospitalized COVID-19 patients, with primary outcome being mortality rate to be observed at the end of 30 days. So it's US trial, is well-controlled trial. We have started using it in a random way because we are permitted to use in situations. Many of the guidelines in India have recommended on case-to-case basis. Next. Now I'll also make a small mention about a drug called TZLS501. It is an anti-interleukin-6 receptor monoclonal antibody, which is currently under development and clinical trials in US. So one has to be aware, because now we are trying to block by monoclonal antibodies. There are receptor antibodies which are also being in process of development. Next. Yes. So then JAK inhibitors. JAK inhibitors we are trying to assess in many hematological disorders. Most physicians are aware of this. So JAK assessment and JAK inhibitors being used in leukemia. So JAK inhibitors are tried in COVID also. AP2 associated protein kinase 1, AAK1, is a key regulator in endocytosis of virus, and interrupting this process may be helpful in treating some cases of infection with SARS-2 COVID disease. Then Bericitinib is a JAK inhibitor as well as AAK2 inhibitor that interrupt the passage of virus into cells and can help to prevent virus infections. Bericitinib is in symptomatic patients infected with COVID-19. A trial called as BERI-COVID is in phase 3 trial, is also undergoing in US. Next. Now there is something called as a neurokinin 1 antagonist or tradipitant. Neurokinin, this receptor is the principal receptor for substance P, which is important in release of inflammatory marker. This is involved in neuroinflammatory processes that can result in serious lung injury following insults such as viral infections, including COVID-19. There is a trial called as Odyssey trial, which is currently recruiting patients with severe or critical COVID-19 infections to assess the efficacy of this drug called as tradipitant 85 milligram BD with the primary outcome of normalization of fever and oxygen saturation by day 14, again in US. Next. Now, we should not forget our own drugs, chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine. Both chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine are weak bases. They are capable of accumulating in acidic organelle like lysosomes of viruses and can increase endosomal or lysosomal pH and inhibit viral replication. So one clear advantage. So it can work as an antiviral drug as well. Plus the chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine can inhibit major HLA class 2 expression, antigen presentation and immune activation via toll-like receptor signaling and G-gas stimulation of interferon genes. Thus, chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine can reduce the production of pro-inflammatory cytokines such as IL-1, IL-6 and interferon alpha, tumor necrosis factor, which are involved in cytokine storm. These immunoregulatory effects synergize their antiviral effects in treatment of COVID-19. So remember that hydroxychloroquine is a very useful drug. It has advantage of working indirectly as an antiviral agent. It has advantage of working against cytokine storm. So I think we should not be getting carried away by certain reports in the press saying that the hydroxychloroquine trial was a failure. Next. Then colchicine. Everybody tries to talk of colchicine. This is an inexpensive, simple, lipid-soluble alkaloid which within 24 to 72 hours of administration accumulates in the granulocytes and monocytes in varying concentration in the plasma and exerts its anti-inflammatory property by same mechanism it works in gout. Recently, colchicine has been recognized as an inhibitor of NLRP3 in inflammasomes and thus mitigating the interleukin activation. There are 4 RCTs going on right now on colchicine in US. One, the most popular one called as Col Corona, will recruit 6,000 outpatients which will be kept on colchicine and they are trying to see the outcome. Actually, cardiologists are most attracted towards this drug because they were using this drug since long in idiopathic pericarditis. Now they are trying to see whether it helps in myocarditis as well, induced by COVID-19. Next. So in conclusions, I'll mention, currently there is no single study which demonstrates the efficacy of single agent in cytokine storm, but investigation and experts in the field recommend a variety of therapies. Among the available options, WHO advises against the use of corticosteroids in the management of COVID-19. However, guidelines do not discuss about the specific management of cytokine storm in COVID-19, but we will continue to use it and it will remain in our guidelines unless proved otherwise. Steroids such as methylprednisolone in low dose of for 3 to 6 days may be useful in patients who are on mechanical ventilation and refractory septic shock. This is suggested by Indian Society of Critical Care Medicine. Next. Interleukin-6 inhibitors like tocilizumab can be useful in severe life-threatening CRS or cytokine storm situations. Use of tocilizumab causes even more profound immunosuppression than steroids, increasing the risk of sepsis, bacterial pneumonia, gastrointestinal perforation, and hepatotoxicity. So while using this drug, you have to be careful in assessing. Next. Now, broad spectrum protease inhibitor properties of ulinistatin leading to cytokine inhibition of cytokine storms, including IL-6, is known. The drug is used commonly in China, Korea, Japan, including India, for management of sepsis and pancreatitis. Anti-inflammatory properties may be considered equivalent to those of steroids without significant suppression of immune system. So if steroid offers an advantage, ulinistatin also will offer an advantage without the side effects of steroids. And I'm told certain hospitals have already started using this drug in Pune. The consensus document from China recommended high dose of ulinistatin in prevention and management of cytokine storm in patients with COVID-19. Next. So this is the chart which shows, and if you, I will not be able to demonstrate from here because the control is with Prashant there. There you can see a pink triangular structure there. So the cytokine storm tries to start, the inflammation tries to start sometime in stage 2A, and it goes on till stage 3. And that is where the steroids come on the scene, and we have recommended in our guidelines, and then other things also come on the scene. Next. So we have a lot of treatment options. Where should we use steroids? We should use steroids at stage 2A and 2B of classification that we have given to you. And that is where you may be benefited by reducing the incidence of cytokine storm. Besides, and of course, low molecular weight heparin we have recommended should also be used. It will have dual advantage. Next. Next. So I think this comes to end of my talk.
सर ते लिंक दाखवायचे आहेत काय?
हा लिंक आता दाखवू आपण आत्ताच दाखवून घेऊ. I will try to show two links. One is for the triage area, which Dr. Kadam had also mentioned last time, and that we can assess the patients in the triage area, and it will give you a good idea about things to come in future. And second link is about getting a guess about how cytokine storm is going to develop. So we will try the cytokine storm link 1, and second the link of triage area. Both ultimately are going to tell you how to reduce the severity of illness, including cytokine storms. Or what we can do is you try to show this in the, you try to get these two links, both the links. One is the link for the casualty, the triage area, and the second is the link for predicting the cytokine storm. Both these, you keep it ready, and then we can go for Dr. Kadam's presentation if he is trying to do.
चालेल सर, चालेल. कदम सर. कदम सर आहे? काय झालं? आपले बाकी लोक आहेत ना?
कनेक्टेड आहेत सगळे.
आपण डिस्कनेक्ट झालो. आपण आहोत का नाही?
आपण कनेक्टेड आहे.
We wanted to demonstrate two links. One is to assess the patient in the triage area for deciding how things will progress for him. And second link gives a broad clue about whether the cytokine storm is going to develop and what are the chances. So
सर थोडा स्क्रीनचा इश्यू आहे ते आपण क्वेश्चन आन्सर घेऊ वाटल्यास ते थोडा स्क्रीन इश्यू झालेला आहे. काही क्वेश्चन्स आहेत का कोणाला आता?
Can I ask a question? I'm Dr. Aniket Doshi.
Yes.
Akaraj sir, are we considering favipiravir in the early stage of disease, stage 1 of disease?
Actually, it started in the trial phase, but China has used it, and they have used it in the initial stage like an antiviral agent.
Okay, so
Trial
it
in
is going to
India-
be available hopefully
Trial
by.
in India has started.
Sorry.
It is Glenmark's product in India. Trials have started, but
Right, sir.
we have not recommended in any of our protocols, neither ICMR nor any of the states.
Okay, sir. And what about Camostat? Will that be available?
Hemostat is in China, but I think we have Ulinostat. I'm told some people have experience of using. Have you used it?
I have used ulinastatin, but unfortunately it was quite late in the disease. It was 2C, 2B or 3 stage.
Even China has recommended Ulinostatin.
Okay.
Korea, South Korea and China are using it.
So it will be beneficial in stage 2 of apparently looks like.
It is not a very costly medication.